voice of Allah, and as I learned the cruel lessons of life, Islam shone through as
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I want to talk to you about the arguments for the existence of God. You see, many people you'll speak to in life will argue about the existence of God. Atheists, agnostics will say to you, no, they don't really believe in God. God is something that you've created as a crutch that you need. So, do you believe in God? Was the first question. At home, when you're watching this, what do you feel? What do you understand? Why or why not do you believe in God? Why do you believe in God? Why don't you believe in God? You see, many people will say, I don't believe in God. And you say, why not? And they go, well, choose not to. And that's not really an answer. You see, they want us to prove why we do, and they don't want to prove why they don't. Some people will say, well, we won't believe in God because we believe in evolution. Well, evolution is a theory and it's never been proven, and as many times as people try to claim that it's been proven, it hasn't been proven satisfactorily. Yes, we believe in there's an evolutionary process among certain animal species and among bird species and some plant species, but the link between the human being evolved and belonging to that same tree or the same plant life that we see today growing in the flora and fauna is not a proven fact. And so what we do, we believe in intelligent design. And so we find that there's many people who claim that they don't believe in God. When we actually get down to it, they do. You know, when there's time of strife or terror or fear, or they're in a car accident or some devastating thing happens to their life, the first thing they call out to is God. You know, so we need to be careful when people say to us they don't believe in God and just give up on them, because we'll find deep down that they actually do. So when you ask people, what is the purpose of life? Many people will say, well, there isn't a purpose. And then say, then why are you here? And they say, there's no reason for me being here. So what you need to do is you need to lead questions. So when somebody says to you, they don't believe there's any purpose of life, and you say, why? And they say, well, there isn't any reason for being here. Say, then why are you here? And they won't have an answer. They'll say, well, maybe they'll be trying to be wise or clever with you, and they'll say, well, I'm here because I'm just some part of some evolutionary experiment. And say, why are you part of some evolutionary experiment? And you see, you keep asking them why, and you'll find that the deep down at the bottom, they all believe for some reason that they're here. They believe that they're here for a purpose. On the internet, I have one confirmed atheist that I speak to on the internet. That I speak to a lot of people, and I do dawah to people on the internet. And he's one confirmed case. Of the thousands and thousands, maybe perhaps millions of people that I've met who claim to be atheists, he's the one confirmed case. And even I have suspicions that he's not really an atheist. I still believe deep down he's just revving me up. I think he has belief, and he has a belief deep down inside. So let's have a look at three different cases of arguments for the existence of God that we can use when trying to explain why we believe in the existence of God. So if you have note paper, or you have a piece of paper there and you want to write these down, the first one, or the ontological argument. And the ontological argument is the argument for the being of God. And so entos it basically means being. A-N-T-O-S. Entos means being. Being or to exist. So entos means to have existed or to have been long before anything else. So God is, they would say entos, God is. And so when a statement is made, or when a Jew has to make a statement, he often says, God is. And he never writes a human name like John is or Michael is, because that is beyond a human description. This is a description only for God. So like the statement I am is a statement that can only be used for God. So I is the ontological answer. Ontological meaning entos, meaning to be or to exist, to pre-exist. And so nothing else can be greater, nothing else can be conceived other than God. God is, God stands alone. God is the most perfect being. So in a way, if somebody had to ask you, how can you prove that God exists? You're saying God is. God is the perfect being. In other words, nothing else can be greater, nothing else can be more perfect. He is the ultimate perfect being. And then God is existence and life and existence and eternity and existence and everything that is. His existence is perfection. In other words, there's nothing that can be improved upon. God cannot be improved upon. There's not a revised standard version. There's not a new version 2.1. God has always been perfect from the beginning. God has always existed. God is therefore always perfect. His existence has been perfect. There's no 2,000 years down the line, he doesn't become more perfect. 10,000 years down the line, he doesn't become more perfect. 1 billion years down the line, he doesn't become more perfect. He has always been perfect. And a God that is not perfect and has need for change cannot be God. A God that has to improve upon himself, or a God that has to somehow grow or change or be new shaped cannot be perfect, because God is perfect. He is all-powerful, all-knowing. He is perfect in every way. He has to be God as perfect. If he is changing, he cannot be perfect, which means he cannot be God. Then he would be a demigod or be a God in training. And we cannot have a God that is a God in training. Allah is perfect in every way. And so the ontological argument says that because Allah existed, because God existed, he is perfect. He cannot change. A God that does not exist is not perfect. A God that is not perfect cannot be God. So a God that does not exist cannot be perfect. So a God that never existed in the very beginning, at the first stage of life, like many Christians believe that Jesus is God who was born. That's impossible, because God cannot be born. God cannot not have existed and then suddenly existed. This is an impossibility. This is something that cannot possibly be. It would be an oxymoron. Something that is perfect cannot be later created into being a being who would later learn to be perfect and then sin and then die and then be perfect again. This is impossible. This is absolutely unheard of. This is something that cannot be accepted. As a logical thinking person with any type of brain in his head cannot accept that a God could be like that. So any logical thinking person cannot accept that a God could be like that. A God has to be always pre-existent, has to be a being that has had no changes, no development, no alterations to his supremeness. He stands on his own. He is master of everything. He cannot have offspring. He cannot be born. He cannot be changed shape. He cannot definitely be sinful and die for the sins of humanity and have sin cast onto him. You see, for Christians, this is a very important concept, because they believe that Jesus was fully God. And if he was fully God, when he was hung on the cross and he shouted out before he passed away, he shouted out, Allah, Allah, li sabachthani, Allah, Allah, God, God, why have you forsaken me? He was forsaken because at that moment in time, Christians believed that the whole of sin of humanity was cast onto Jesus. Now that would mean that God, for the first time in humanity, according to Christians, he accepted all the sin of humanity into himself. So God became a sinful creature, and that God rejected God because he was sinful. This is unbelievably stupid. This is ridiculous. This is the craziest statement that anyone could even come up or dream up. Because if God had to be sinful, there's no ways that any of us could be a worshipper of a sinful God. And then Lucifer would be just as well one that we could worship. Shaitan could be one that we could worship, and this is not possible. God cannot be sinful. God cannot be imperfect. So a God that does not exist is not perfect. Jesus cannot be God because he did not exist at a point in time. So the most perfect being must be necessarily existed before anything else. It's a necessary fact that God had to exist before everything else. If he didn't exist before anything else, he cannot be God. I hope you understand. I hope this is not too difficult. If you don't understand, let me just sum it up quickly. The ontological argument is that God existed before everything else. He was already perfect in every way whatsoever. And he was already perfect in every way. There's no way that he needed to be anything added onto him. He cannot be sinful. He could not be sinful at any time and then become perfect. He was perfect right from the beginning. He always existed and always was. The next argument, or the next way to understand God, the next way that you can describe God, is we call it the cosmological answer. The cosmological answer basically, or cosmological argument and answer, is basically an argument that is described in 5 parts. And the 5 parts is that God is the first mover. In other words, before anything that could happen, nothing started without God first being the original mover. So the atom could not have formed without God first forming the atom. Now many people will say their science proves that God couldn't have created all that is. This is all because of one atom and how this atom. Who started that first atom? Who started the first reaction in the chain reaction that supposedly took place the whole way through humanity? The Big Bang, everything else that we have today that is so commonly spoken about. Who was the initial starter of that? Something had to start, something had to form in the void of darkness before anything else, before the first microcosm that ever existed. Something had to cause that reaction to take place. So there had to be, the cosmological answer would say, or the cosmological argument is that the very first mover, the very first starter of that very first atom If that was all that Allah did, if he stood back and said, I'm going to cause a chain reaction, but I'm going to start this chain reaction, isn't that an argument for the existence of God? So this cosmological argument has 5 points to it. The first is that Allah or God is the first mover. First of all, so he's the first mover. Imagine yourself pushing something. He's the first mover, the first one to start the movement. Second part connects with the first part in that Allah is the first causer, which means no reaction can be put into action unless it's moved, and then he causes the reaction to take place. So imagine an amoeba. An amoeba is a single-celled creature. It self-reproduces. It doesn't need, it's asexual. It has neither a male nor female, and it breaks apart. Now that thing cannot break apart unless it is moved to be in existence in the first place. So that's the first mover. Then it is the first cause, because Allah allows it to split and break apart from each other and self-reproduce. This is a very interesting point, because nothing can take place. You cannot take your first breath. Christians have a disagreement on this, and some Christians agree with this, that in the Bible when it says, and man, and God breathed into man, and man became a living soul. What happened? God breathed into man when he went, for the first time, man became a living soul. In other words, he gave a soul. So when he dies, he goes, breathes out his last breath, and his soul returns. In other words, his soul leaves his body, and so it goes for judgment or whatever else is going to take place. That first cause, that first breath in a way that is breathed into man, that first starting cause permits to happen. When that child is formed in the first stages, when the egg is fertilized by the sperm, when it gets through and the whole development starts place, that is the first cause. The mover is when the sperm and the egg start to move and it gets to the right position. That is the first move. The first cause is when the reaction starts to take place. Then it also understands that God is the first mover, God is the first cause, and Allah is necessary, the self-existent. In other words, because he's the first mover, because he's the first cause, that means he had to be the first exister. He had to exist before everything else. A cause and a move could not happen unless he existed pre all those things. We're going to take a short break. When we get back from the short break, we'll continue with this interesting subject.
Walking on.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are talking about the cosmological argument for the existence of God. Many people want proof of why we believe in God. And these are good ones that you can use. I think they're good, that you can use to help explain the existence of God. You know, we believe La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah without any problem. We didn't have these necessities, we didn't need to have these proofs. But sometimes people want proofs, and these are some arguments that you can use to explain them. The fourth argument in this is God is the standard of all goodness. In other words, Allah wants all good things to happen, all perfect things to happen. So this argument says, the fourth part or the fourth pillar of this argument is that God is the first cause of all good. So he wants things to reproduce, he wants things to thrive, he wants things to grow, he wants things to have a beginning, he wants things to have a first cause. Now, because he's the first mover, he wants things to flourish, so they must reproduce, they must beget, they must have. But this is not something that Allah needs. Allah is the beginning, the self-existent. He didn't have anything that created him. He wasn't created, he wasn't born, he didn't have a beginning starting block. However, we all need that. And so Allah wants a good standard for everybody. God is a standard of all good. God wants all things to thrive and to produce and to be great and to flourish and to be happy. So he is the first producer of good. And that's what he wants for all mankind and for all creations and everything that he has. And God is the intelligent designer of the universe. God is the intelligent designer of the universe. Nothing happened by chance. He was the one who put everything into motion, into place. Whether there was the Big Bang or not, that doesn't make any difference, because everything happened and everything balanced in exactly the way he wanted to do it. Now we have controlled explosions today. People have controlled explosions. We have controlled experts that are able to bring a whole building down perfectly. If you want to watch a building coming down perfectly, you look at the reruns of September 11th and you see how beautifully that building fell down. Not even the greatest demolition artist who could stand back and say, well, wow, this is amazing, this could have happened by fluke. But the only fluke in the whole history of mankind that a building was able to fall down so controlled was the buildings of September 11th. No other buildings in the history of mankind ever come down so perfectly. But if you look at it, it almost looks like it was a controlled explosion. And I'm not going to get too much into detail of that. I probably said more than I should on the subject. But if you look at a building and there's a demolition brings down a building, it falls down perfectly. But it didn't fall down by itself. It was perfectly planned in just the right places to put those explosions in the right place to bring that building down. So the same thing happens no matter what happened in the universe, no matter how we understand the Big Bang, whatever it was, it falls under the same categories of the cosmological argument, that the first thing was the first mover. Allah decided that how it was going to be. Two, that it was going to be the first cause. He created that first spark, that first reaction that would take place. He was self-existent, so he didn't get created in any way. He's not part of the whole Big Bang. He was before the Big Bang. He is the standard of goodness, so he knew exactly how everything was going to lay out after he caused this controlled reaction. He knew exactly where the moon would be, where the Jupiter would be, where Pluto would be, where the Earth would be, what axis they'd run before the explosion even took place. And then finally, he is the designer of the universe. So he caused the universe to come into shape and to be in the form that it is by intricate design. There is no logical, educated, proper thinking human being, well-qualified scholar in the universe who believes this is by chance. All of them agree with the cosmological argument. It's only a couple of university students and a couple of first-year or third-year university students that probably would have the argument that this is random. This is not random. This is well thought out, well compiled. It's a thought process that went behind this, an intricate design, and it is amazing. And so the cosmological argument is another one that you can use to explain the existence of God and how God is definitely the creator behind this. Then the next argument is very similar to a watch, and this is called the teleological argument. And basically this started around the 18th century, this argument came into play. And basically it's very, very similar to the way you would see the inside of your watch. And the argument is argument for design, and basically everything is designed, everything fits into a pattern, everything works together, there's a purpose, there's order, there's a goal and everything. Nothing is chance. It's not like the teleological argument where there was a bomb that went off and an explosion went off and then these things fell into place, but still it was a controlled demolition. No, this is another one. This is totally different. This says that there's a purpose, there's an order, there's a goal. It was created slowly but surely. There's a complexity of order. There's a complexity and an order in everything in the universe. And this suggests there must be an intelligent design of the universe, and the intelligent designer of the universe has to be God. There's no other way to look at it. Every part is put together so perfectly, 1 millimeter off, 1 degree off, and we wouldn't have the balance that we have. You know, sometimes when you buy a new motor vehicle, they say to you that you mustn't drive it more than 20 miles the first day, because what happens, you need to get all the parts to work together properly, and then after a few weeks you can drive 100, 200, 500, however far you want to drive. So some people say, yes, these perfect orders that we have took place over hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, we don't see any evidence of it. Remember, we are still receiving information. Allah permitted information to be relayed to us, relayed back to earth very slowly over thousands of years, over hundreds of thousands of years. We see reactions that took place in space. We saw explosions, we saw dying stars, we saw stars being born that actually took place hundreds or maybe even thousands of years ago. And we're receiving that information now, which tells us that the universe was thought out it's in a very arranged, it's very ordered, it's very goal-oriented, it's very purpose-orientated. So we have this information being relayed back to us. So we can't see that this is all random. We see how everything is balanced so perfectly, how the sun orbits and the moon, or how each planet orbits itself. I might be wrong about the sun orbiting, but the way that everything revolves and turns in motion and it stays in exactly the same place that it's supposed to stay in. And we see how things collapse and explode and have design. So there's an intelligent design. This is the new creationists. New creationists say that everything is, we see this whole thing being held together perfectly. We had the creation of the heavens and the earth, and we see things continuously changing and being evolved and shaped. So we see the argument for this is that everything has been designed perfectly. It's an intelligent design. It's a design where everything is put together perfectly. And so can't be a random act. This is something that was well thought through, well done. So if we look, we see the argument for the existence of a God is very, very clear. And so many people might say, well, what about the arguments against the existence of God? The arguments against the existence of God would be, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? Why do you believe that God is all good and all-knowing and all-powerful and allows these things to happen? Why does an all-good and all-knowing and all-powerful God allow evil and suffering and murder and all these things? So therefore, because there's pain and suffering and evil and injustice, and because people are being blown up and killed by natural disasters, this is an argument that God must not exist. Now, this is not an argument for why God does not exist. Remember, many of these things that are happening in the universe and in the world today are because of what we have done. We have destroyed the ozone layer. We have fought land after land. We are destroying natural resources. We are pulling coal and gold and diamonds and oils out of the earth, which are there to protect us and to keep the world in the way it was supposed to be and keep it safe. So many of the things that we are doing, many of the disasters that we are seeing today are not acts of God at all, but acts of man. This is man that has done these things, and we should take responsibility. It's very easy to stand back and throw our hands in the air and say, oh, it's God who did this, it's God's fault. But remember, Allah has everything under control, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Everything is under the control of Allah. And nothing will happen to humanity that Allah does not permit to happen. Why these things happen? Yes, we can say that many of these are mysteries, but we can also say many of these things happen because we call them upon ourselves. Now, why does a person who's innocent get AIDS? This is something that Allah maybe has allowed that person to go through as a test, maybe for him to grow, maybe to become a stronger person. Maybe he didn't do anything wrong, he just got it from a simple blood transfusion. So the safe bet would be, what would the safe bet be? There are 4 options. The safe bet would be to believe that there is a God and believe that there is a life hereafter. Because then, when you die, you get the rewards of paradise. The unsafe bet of the whole group would be to believe that there isn't a God and to find out when you die that there is a God after all. So this is not what you want to be. You don't want to be amongst the group that believes that there is no God and then find out when you die that there is a paradise and there is a God after all. See, the safe bet is that you believe in God. Today there are people who are taking the gamble. There's a 25% chance that you are right. There is more than 3/4 of a chance that you are wrong. So what would you bet? Well, would you rather bet all your money on the fact that there is no God and then you find out that there is one? So today, any logical person, anybody with a thought, who is with a reasonable mind, with reasonable thinking, will know that there is a God. So your job today is to find out how much time you have left, how much time you need to spend concentrating on the hereafter. You see, Allah is calling each and every one of us to submit to Him. We need to make that wise choice. We need to take that decision. What are we going to do? Are we going to follow God? Are we going to choose God? Or are we going to reject Him? You see, the people that you're speaking to and they say they don't believe in God, the reason they say they don't believe in God, the majority of them, is because they're afraid of what they might have to do. They might have to have change, and everyone's afraid of change. And they're also afraid of making a fool of themselves. But what a big fool they will be that if they die one day and they find out that all that they had rejected, all that they said didn't exist actually does exist, and they find out there is a God, that there is a great mastermind behind everything. The logical thing to do is submit to one God. Submit to a God that has always pre-existed. Submit to a God that has a logical plan of action for everything that will take place. A God that has, even where it seems to be chaotic, there is order. This is the God that we serve. These are the qualities of our God. A God that knows exactly what is happening. A God that has personal interest in your every single need and every single want. A God that wants you to submit to Him. A God that cares and loves for you. This God is Allah. This is the God of Islam. This is all we have time for today, and I hope you've learned a little bit from me. And from me, Areeb Islam, until we meet again. Assalamu alaikum.
I am a Muslim.